Hey guys, this is Jeff Stanek with Figured Out Baseball. We've got a really good Figured Out Baseball podcast for you today, and one that is a little bit unique compared to some other ones that we've done. This is in the series that we're calling The Real Dirt. It is where we kind of dive pretty deep into one particular subject and try to sort of exhaust it and just talk about one particular thing for anybody that's interested in that one subject, as opposed to the normal podcast where we jump around a little bit. In this podcast, we are going to talk about the mental side of winning, and we're going to have this discussion with Donato Finelli. He is currently a mental training and peak performance specialist for a company called Capex Consulting out of Pittsburgh, and I'll give you a quick background on Donato before we get into questions with him, and just let you know a little bit more about him. He is a graduate of Rutgers University, where he also played ice hockey. He got his master's degree in sports and performance psychology from the University of Denver. He works in the University of Denver Center for Performance Excellence, and now, of course, works at Capex Consulting Athletes in a number of sports. So, Donato, we really appreciate you being on the podcast today. I think it's going to be a great one. I'm just kind of curious why you chose this one, why you decided that you would like to do a podcast on the mental side of winning. You know, why this was a subject that you wanted to get into on a podcast with me.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Jeff. I'm excited to work with you and talk to the Figured Out Baseball family. So the reason why I wanted to jump in on this podcast was because 99.9% of the time, athletes don't come to talk to me when they're winning. They come to talk to me when they're struggling and things aren't going well. And so, ultimately the goal for pretty much all athletes is to win. Like the famous Herman Edwards speech where you play to win the game. And so I think such a huge part of winning is mental. And especially in a sport like baseball, where it's a game of failure, where if you fail 70% of the time, you're super successful. So I think that I have a lot to offer to help athletes understand of what they can do to win at a consistent level.
And winning is something that I personally really enjoy talking about. It seems like this is not as much of a majority opinion anymore, which is baffling to me, that people don't, teams at high levels don't measure their success by wins. It doesn't make sense to me, and maybe you might disagree with that as well. But to me, like a college program or a pro organization, if you're not winning, to me, you're not as successful as you could be. I mean, I don't know any other way to put that. To me, if you're doing all the things right, of course, grades are very important, and absolutely getting your collegiate athletes to graduate on time, helping, getting them in a position where they can get a good job. That stuff's extremely important. Don't get me wrong there. But to me, if you're not winning, there are things that you're missing. So I really enjoy talking about winning and what goes into it. And in this case, the mental side of it, as you said, is something that a lot of people ignore. Or ignore until they really need it, which in some cases is too late. So I'm excited to get into this with you and just kind of find out, from your side of things, what is really important. So let me just kind of ask that broad question to start with, Donato. Where's some place to start, something that just to sort of help people, teams, individuals, build a base mentally to be prepared as possible to have a successful career? And this stuff probably translates to off the field as well, but on the field specifically, what's one place people can start that you kind of need to have this in place if you want to have sustained success?
Yeah, so before I get into like where to start with that, I think I want to go back to what you said first about how, not enough people talk about winning and all. And I think it really comes down to, it depends on what level you're at. If you're, it's youth baseball, it's like, the local town league and all, winning isn't the emphasis. It's on development, it's on learning life skills. But as you get to higher levels, as you get into college and then professional, winning is really important. And jobs are on the line. So for coaches, for players and all, winning is really important. I think what's important to understand, though, is that success and winning are separate entities. Success and winning do not necessarily mean the same thing. So I think before you start to get into, okay, what do I need to do to win, you got to start to define what means, what failing means, and taking it one step further, what it means to not succeed and what it means to not fail. And so by giving yourself those four options, success, failure, not succeeding, not failing, then you can kind of game plan of where you're trying to get to, where you're trying to go. What does it mean to be successful? What does it mean to fail? Just because you don't win, does that mean you're not successful? No, you could still be super successful, not necessarily get the win. And it's not that winning is not important. Is it the most important thing in the world? No, there's things in life that are far more important than winning and losing a baseball game. But ultimately, as an athlete, as a coach, you're a competitor, and you play to win the game.
Do you think? Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to ask, as far as, I guess separating success from winning, or succeeding from failing. Is that something that you've seen is just on a, different teams are always going to define those things differently? How as an individual or as a coach, do you separate the two? And should you separate the two? Because there are coaches out there who believe that winning is success. If you're not winning, then you're not succeeding. Do you suggest that teams and individuals, do you suggest they separate the two, or are you just kind of saying that they don't need to necessarily go hand in hand? Just kind of curious your take on that.
Yeah, no, great point. It totally depends on the team. Like you take the Pittsburgh Pirates this year and compare them to like the Yankees. What the Yankees would consider to be a successful season for this year is going to be vastly different than what the Pirates deem to be a successful season this year. For a team like the Yankees, winning the World Series is a successful season. But for a team like the Pirates, I mean, that's kind of an unrealistic expectation. So, for what someone like the Yankees would consider successful is going to be different than someone like the Pirates. And even within that, you have certain players that are at different skill levels. So, what's a successful season for, the everyday starter might be a little bit different than what's a successful season from the utility player that starts, once every 10 games.
That's a great way to put it, and really cuts deep for a Pirate fan, but you're absolutely right. The Yankees, what was a couple years ago, the Yankees fired Girardi, and they made it to like the American League Championship. Like if the Pirates made it to the National League Championship, there'd be like a friggin' parade. And I say that as a Pirates fan. So you're absolutely right. That's a really good way to put it. I like that a lot. And with the individuals, that you're certainly right. The guy that's the perennial all-star has got different expectations than a guy who's, hanging on for dear life in the big leagues and is a career journeyman, career utility man.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think taking it one step further and getting into where you really start with being able to win at a consistent level, that really starts with your team culture. I think winning is really challenging, but anybody or any team is capable of winning once. Consistently winning, that doesn't happen by chance. Winning consistently doesn't happen by luck. Winning consistently starts with your team culture. And so when you look at what team culture is, I think first of all, I think it's like one of those buzz phrases we hear a lot about in sports now. Well, a lot of teams, a lot of athletes don't actually know what team culture actually is. And, I think everyone kind of has like a different understanding, a different definition of team culture. But really what it comes down to is team culture is the shared values, shared goals, shared beliefs, the roles, and the norms. So what are the things you value? What are your goals? What are the things that you believe in? What's everyone's role? And what are the behaviors that you normally engage in? And so that's really what team culture is all about. And that's consistently winning starts with an effective team culture.
Now, I'm interested in this part a lot because I've been as a coach in a number of different team cultures and where it's sort of presented differently. Do you think that team culture really needs to be spelled out for players? Do they, even assistant coaches. Like you come on as an assistant coach with a head coach who's been established for a while, and you obviously like want to contribute to the team culture. Do you think it's absolutely necessary to have that stuff almost like written on a sign, you know, in the locker room, or like hand out a piece of paper to the players the first day you meet with them and say like, these are the expectations, this is who we are as a team? Or do you think that stuff can sort of just be almost absorbed when you're around the team and you kind of just like get a feel for what happens at practice, and that just from the sort of the way that the head coach is around the team all the time? And I'm curious to know like how defined and written out you think this needs to be able to have a good team culture, as opposed to just like you show up and just almost like feel it from the players and the coaches who have been there. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm phrasing that very well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, it is a little bit of both. I think it is important to write these things down and to be really clear about them, so that way everyone's on the same page. There's no ambiguity. It's just very clear, very concise. So like, these are what our goals are. These are the things that we value. This is everyone's role. And so that way, if someone new steps in, they already know what these things are. But at the same time, the culture might evolve throughout a season and all. And I think a lot of that, the team culture stuff, is picked up without necessarily having to explicitly state it. You just sort of pick up on everyone's behaviors and the way that they carry themselves, the way they train, the way they prepare, the way they perform. So yeah, I think it is important to write these things down and be really clear and make sure that everyone's on the same page and talk about it in the beginning of the year. But I don't think just having a conversation once about team culture at the beginning of the season is going to be sufficient. I think that these are the kinds of things that you should be constantly revisiting and all. And I think it's important to check in with your team culture and all, you know? Like if you're going through a losing streak, maybe taking a step back and be like, okay, are we living in accordance with our values right now? Are we performing in the way that we want to perform? And so I think when it's really clear, then when there is a gap between the actions and the actual culture, then, you know, you can start to bridge that gap with the more clear it is. Did I do a good job of explaining that, or did that just cause even more confusion?
No, 100%. I'm right with you. And actually want to take it one step further. Do you believe that certain team cultures, because let me backtrack a bit. I think that, you know, the like you said, it's a buzz phrase now. Like every team talks about their culture. I can't buy into the fact that everyone's got a team culture and everyone's doing a good job, everyone's doing it right, because however you measure success, a lot of different teams are having a lot of different, you know, amounts of success. Do you think that there is a certain team culture that will work anywhere if it's done right? Do you think there are certain team cultures that just don't work, or do you think that it depends on, you know, like this head coach A is going to need to have this type of culture for his team to be successful. Head coach B is going to need to have a different one because that's his personality. And I'm curious about this because my question, I guess, would boil down to is, could you take a winning coach, or Tom Brady, for example? This is like we're in May of 2020, and Tom Brady has just signed on to go play with Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Could you put Tom Brady in a place, or Bill Belichick in a place like Cleveland or even Tampa, and have success because success follows that person because that person creates the culture, and that culture will win anywhere? Or do certain cultures only work in certain places? Does that make sense? I know I'm kind of getting pretty deep, but I'm very, very interested in this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's one right culture. I don't think there's just one. All right, this is the template for team culture, and if you follow this, you'll be successful.
Right, and I guess, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but like in football, for example, so the Patriots haven't figured out. Could someone copy Bill Belichick, like his exact blueprint, take it anywhere and win with it? I guess that's, if I had to sort of sum up my question, that's kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah, so I don't think you can necessarily take that exact culture and just apply it anywhere. I think what you can do is draw from certain things about that culture and see how it applies to you and your team. Every team's a little bit different. Every coach is a little bit different. Every player's a little bit different. And so every successful team culture is going to be a little bit different. And, I think you can definitely learn a lot from successful team cultures like what Bill Belichick has with the Patriots, or what Joe Torre had with the Yankees. And you can draw certain things, but ultimately, if Bill Belichick goes and coaches the Bills, he's no longer with the Patriots, so everything that he did with the Patriots won't necessarily be successful anymore. But he can take certain things that he did with the Patriots and apply that to coaching the Bills. And so, to answer your point, I think that there are certain things about certain cultures that are successful, and I think there's certain things about certain team cultures that are unsuccessful. But I think you can kind of cherry pick the things that are going to fit with you and your team and apply them as you see fit.
This is so interesting to me. It's just like mind-bending that you could take Bill Belichick out of New England and put him in Buffalo or put him in Cincinnati or wherever, and he might, the odds of him having that type of success are just not very high, and that is just it's just so mind-blowing to me. That's why it's just so interesting. I'm going to keep...
One other thing about it, though, sorry to interrupt you.
Good.
I think it's important to understand is that a team culture doesn't become established overnight. It's a process. And I think you lay a foundation from day one, and you continue to build on that foundation throughout the years. And I think now someone like Bill Belichick, he's at a point to where that culture is so well established that you can just plug almost anyone in and plug almost any player in, and they can be successful in that team culture. Now, Bill Belichick goes and coaches the Bills or the Bengals. He's starting back from square one, so he's going to have to lay that foundation. And don't get me wrong, he has a really strong foundation that he can take from New England and apply to any team that he's coaching. But that doesn't necessarily mean whatever new team he's going to coach is going to become successful overnight. It's still going to take time to establish that culture and build on that team culture.
It's a really fascinating thing to me to watch in college sports. I don't coach in college anymore, but I'll kind of consult families and individuals sometimes, and kids will kind of ask me, how do I know what I'm getting into here? And this is a new coach taking over a new program, and there's always energy around that. And are they going to win? And my answer is a lot of times look at what the head coach has done in his career, and whatever he's done is probably going to continue to happen. Not always, but in my experience, winners tend to win, and it might take them a couple years to turn it around. But the guy that's had a track record of winning will usually figure out how to win, but sometimes they don't. And that to me is I'd love to do a case study on that. This guy's had success at, 3 or 4 different schools and a tremendous amount of success, and then goes to a new school and just they can't get it straight. They can't figure it out. And it's does the coach change? Did he lose some of the things? Did he try to do things differently? And anyway, it's such an interesting thing to me with team culture. I want to dig a little bit more, Donato, if you will allow me to.
For sure.
Do you have anything within team culture that you think are need to be staples, or things that maybe you don't want to have within your team culture, that kind of whoever you are, within hitting mechanics, there are so many different mechanics out there, but there are some certain staples that I think most hitting coaches will agree on. Is there anything in team culture that you would maybe say this is sort of your Mount Rushmore of team culture, things that almost every successful team out there has in place?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, first of all, I think it's important to establish what your team values are. What are the things that are most important to you in the way that you live your life on and off the field? I think it's really important to establish roles. Like this is roles for everybody on the team and everyone that's affiliated with the team. Like this is your job. This is how you're going to contribute. Whether it's the everyday starter, that leadoff, whether it's the last man on the roster that only gets a couple at bats throughout the season, whether it's the team manager that organizes the travel and anything. Everyone has their own roles. And I think another piece to that Mount Rushmore of team culture would be team goals. What are your goals? Where are you trying to get to, and how are you going to get there?
I love it, and it's pretty good answers for being put on the spot. This is a good point of the podcast where people are probably figuring out that we don't script these ahead of time, and we're really, just kind of going where it takes us. So let's talk about goals a little more. How important are goals to winning? Do you need goals? How specific do your goals need to be if you're going to be a winner? Do you have to go into a season as a team saying that our goals are to win this many games and go this far in our league, or do you think it's, is it enough to have sort of unwritten goals that, like, we're good, we're going to continue to be good, and we're going to compete? Do you need to talk about them? Do you need to write things out? Like, what are your thoughts on goals?
So I think not setting goals and not writing goals down is kind of like just getting in your car and just going for a drive. Well, that's great, but where are you going? Where are you trying to get there? Where are you trying to get to? How are you going to get there? So I think setting goals is kind of like establishing the destination that you're trying to get to. Once you set that goal, okay, now I get in the car, now I know where I'm trying to go, and now that I know where I'm trying to go, I can figure out how to get there. I can figure out the most effective route. I can figure out possible detours or not. I don't want to say shortcuts because there are no shortcuts to winning, but you give yourself a plan. You can map it out. Should they be specific? Yeah, absolutely. They should be. What we talk about SMART goals. SMART is an acronym for effective goal setting. So effective goals should be specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic but challenging, and time sensitive. And you make your goals even smarter by adding an ER and taking time to evaluate and revise those goals. So you don't want to just set the goals in the beginning of the season and then just forget about it and never revisit them. No, it's important to constantly be checking in on those goals, checking in on your progress towards them, and seeing what you need to evaluate or revise those goals. It's kind of like having the GPS handy with you. You don't just get in the car and plug it in the GPS and then throw the GPS into the glove box. No, like you have that GPS out in front of you so you can see it. You can see how you're doing on your time. Is it going to take longer than you thought? Is there some roadblock in the way that you need to now work around? So yes, it is important to set the goals. You want to be specific and measurable. You want to be constantly checking in on them. I think what's important to understand, though, is that goals aren't... There's different kinds of goals that you can set. And I think, like, a lot of people think in terms of, like, long-term goals and short-term goals, and that is helpful. But what people in my field do, we talk about outcome goals, performance goals, and process goals. Now, your outcome goals, those are the things that you ultimately wish to achieve. And those are things like to win the league championship. Performance goals are what you need to do to get there. Performance goals basically come down to your stats, but they're based on improvement. So some examples of performance goals would be things like dropping the team ERA from 3.5 to 3. It's increasing the team batting average from 225 to 255. Going from averaging 1.5 errors a game to averaging 1 error a game. And then you have process goals. Process goals are how you need to do it. Process goals are the little things. They're the fundamentals. They're based on things like your work ethic and your mentality. So some examples of process goals for hitters would be things like establish effective routines, visualize successful at-bats, take batting practice for 30 minutes every day, use positive self-talk. So outcome goals are very motivating, but they're uncontrollable. You can set the goal to win the league championship, and you can do everything in your power right, and you can be really successful and still come up short of that goal. Performance goals, they're tangible, they're practical, and you have a lot of influence over them, but ultimately you can't control those things. You can be putting together really quality at-bats, but for whatever reason, they're just not dropping in. You can hit a line drive to center field that should go into the gap for a double, but the center fielder just makes an unbelievable diving catch. So even though you have a lot of influence over those performance goals, ultimately you cannot control them. Process goals, you have 100% control over. You have 100% control over those things like your fundamentals, your work ethic, your mentality. And so, when we talk about trust the process, I think that the best way to do that is to set process goals for every game, every practice, and really focus your attention on that. So I think to bring it all together, you set your goals, you determine your process, and then you trust your process.
Do you think that teams that consistently win more than other teams, like I have a hard time believing that teams that consistently are under 500 go into the season, and let's not talk about professional teams because, the Pirates versus the Yankees, there's there are a lot of factors there financially, whatever. But in a college setting, high school setting, the field is a lot more level most of the time. You're usually in a conference with teams that are similar to yours, similar budget. High school, obviously, you're going to play, and when you get to the playoffs at least, you're going to play teams that are in the same same size schools that you are. Do teams that win consistently set higher goals typically in your experience? Do they have more specific goals? Do they, what do they do differently? I'm just assuming that, Team A and Team B both set goals and one of them wins consistently and one of them loses consistently. Is there anything that you've seen that the team that wins consistently does a little bit better as far as setting goals, or do they set more realistic goals? Are they more focused on the process, or just anything that you've seen that you've noticed? And I'm asking this, Donato, like just thinking about the person who's out there that they want to win so bad. They really want to win, and they've thought they felt like they're doing things right, but it's not happening for them. Just specifically goal setting, how can you get better how can you help establish your team to be better within your goal setting, if there is an answer to that question?
Well, you bring up a lot of really great points. I think, going back to what we talked about with team culture, every team's going to have different goals of what they're striving for. And I would always encourage teams and athletes to set high goals, set goals that are going to be really challenging and realistic, but are going to push you. You don't want to set goals that are too easy. I think at the end of the day, what's most important is where your focus is on the day in and day out grind. If your focus is solely on winning and losing, then you're not focused on what you need to do and how you need to do it in order to get that result that you're working for. It's kind of like a paradox. It's not that winning isn't important, but if you're solely focused on winning, then your focus isn't on the process. The focus isn't on the things that you can control. So I guess to answer your question, I think one of the things that successful teams and successful athletes do is to focus their attention on the process. When you're stepping up to the plate for a big clutch at-bat at the end of the game, if you're focused on what end outcome is going to happen, then you're not focused on putting together a quality at-bat. So focus on that process. Focus on your hitting mechanics. Focus on your preparation. Focus on your mentality. Focus on the things that you can control. And ideally what ends up happening is when you focus on those things, you perform at a higher level. When you perform at a higher level, you end up getting the result that you want. So, I think it all comes back to just, establishing where you're trying to get to, determining your process, and then just focusing on that process day in and day out and not get caught up on things that are out of your control.
let's try to define that a little bit further, trust the process, because that's another buzz term that you hear constantly, but another one that I don't believe that everyone who says it knows what they're talking about, or at least sticks with it, because you hear it too often. It's one of those things that, like, you hear it so often it stops meaning as much to you. But I think the very, very, very successful teams, speaking specifically at the college level and even at the high school level, teams that you see that go pretty far every year, they're very good at trusting their process. Can we try to define that a little bit better for someone who is not just, it creates a cloudy picture for them when they hear trust the process? Maybe you could talk about specifically, okay, if I'm a hitter specifically, and then maybe we can talk about a coach after this. If I'm a hitter or a pitcher, what does it mean, like, in an actual game, to focus on the process as opposed to focusing on results or outcome?
Yeah, so I think the simplest way to define the process is what you need to do and how you need to do it to get the outcome that you're striving for. So it's how you prepare. It's how you train. I think for a hitter, the process would be things like your mechanics, your fundamentals, your preparation, your mentality. What are the little things that I can do that are in my control that'll get me the outcome that I want? I think really what's most important to understand is that the process are things that you have complete control over. You don't have very much control over the outcome. You have a lot of influence over the outcome, but ultimately you cannot control the outcome. So the process are the things that you have complete control over. So let me turn it around on you. As a hitter or as a pitcher, when you step up to the plate or when you step up to the mound, what are some of those things that you have complete control over?
Well, speaking as a hitter, you don't have control over a lot of things, but what you do have control over are, things like swinging at a good pitch,
Yep.
Having an approach going up to the plate, which maybe another cloudy term for people, but to me that would mean, what's the situation? What am I trying to do in this situation? And just having an idea before you go up there. And 90% of the time, it's just put a good swing on a ball and get the barrel to the ball swing at a good pitch that's good pitch for me to hit. But sometimes it's move a runner over, or sometimes it's try to hit behind a runner, or whatever it may be. But to me, swinging the pitches I should swing at, laying off pitches I should lay off of, that's basically what I can control in an at-bat. And I can also control focusing on the next pitch as opposed to letting that last pitch rattle around in my mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so putting together quality at-bats, having a good approach, making sure that you're prepared before the game and all. Like, those
Right.
are all things that are part of the process.
And competing, I think that's a big part of it as well, is just, committing to being competitive in your at-bat, and like every pitch, like trying to, a thing that I would say a lot as a coach would be to win this pitch. That was something that was like a key phrase for me as a coach, is just trying to get guys to compete every pitch. And even if it's like in the cage, and this is where you just talked about, like you take this back to your cage work. If you're throwing BP in the cage and a guy takes a borderline pitch, and like if you're actually like pitching, you're throwing BP like in counts and kind of going through at bats, and you have a 2-0 count and you throw a pitch that's a called strike, but it wasn't a strike that guy should swing at, and he takes it. Like, to me, my feedback would be, well, you won that pitch to me, because if you swung at that pitch, you're probably going to be out. So to me, you won that pitch. So just talking about and defining like winning this pitch and trying to play one pitch at a time, like those are things that I really talk to our players about, because just like you're saying, I felt like, they can control that. They can control how competitive they are from pitch to pitch and trying to win every single pitch in the at-bat, whether you're on the mound or at the plate.
Yeah, so, I think similar to how there's not one right team culture that every team should follow, there's not just one right process that every team and every athlete should follow. It's a little bit different for everybody. So I think, first of all, determining what is your process. what is going to give you the best possible chance of being successful? What do you want to do? How do you want to do it? And so I think when you determine what your process is as a team and as an individual, then you can focus on that process. And, similar to how, like, we were talking about how, like, it's kind of like a buzz phrase, but not enough people, like, actually know what it is. Well, I think this is why it's important to have these kinds of conversation with your players and with your coaches and all, so that everyone can be on the same page. And so if you step up to the plate and, you have a really good approach and you're only swinging at good pitches, but for whatever reason you don't get a hit and you strike out or you fly out or whatever, then you can go back and analyze it. Okay, well, how was my process then? Was I swinging at good pitches? Yeah. Did I have a good approach? Yeah. Did I get the outcome I wanted? No. But you know what? If I step up to the plate next time and I have a good approach and I'm swinging at good pitches, will I get a hit next time? I don't know. But ultimately, if you stick with it, then ultimately those results are going to come in the long run. It might not necessarily happen in the short term, but if you stick with that process and you trust that process, in the long run, it's going to work out for you.
Those are things I agree with on an individual and a team basis. When teams struggle, particularly compared to what the expectation was, like, that's a conversation that I think good coaches have with their teams, is that, we're going through a little funk right now, but there's a, time to say trust the process. Like, we're training, we are preparing extremely well. We're preparing well enough to win, but the ball's just kind of not going in our favor right now, and that's part of the game of baseball that might be a little bit different than a lot of other games, is you can do a lot of stuff right, but if you run into the wrong pitcher at the wrong time, then you can lose the game in a hurry, and that stuff happens in the playoffs to teams all the time. Talking about the Pirates, like, 3 years in a row when they made it to the playoffs, they saw Madison Bumgarner, Jake Arrieta, and I forget who else, Johnny Cueto, like 3 years in a row in the wild card games. And like that kind of stuff is like sometimes that's the part you can't control. But, trusting the process, and what kind of a conversation between coach and player individually or as a team is that, like, you just got to trust that what we're doing is going to work. It's not working right now, but it's going to work in the long run. And again, whether you're talking to an individual player or a team, I think if you really trust as a coach that what you're doing is going to produce wins, even if it's not right now, but you stick with it, you've got the stick-to-itiveness to kind of see it through, then you got to believe that it's going to produce the results that you want, particularly if you've had success with it before. But I think, to me, that's a lot what trust the process means, is to just trust what you're doing day to day, that what you're doing is good enough to get the results that you want.
Yeah, and I'll be completely honest with you. I think this is one of those things that it's so much easier said than done. I think it's really easy to say, when things aren't going well, I think it's easy to say, just trust the process, just trust the process, just trust the process. But if those results aren't coming, if you aren't getting the outcomes that you want, it's really hard to continue to trust that process. And so I think a lot of people, a lot of athletes are very quick to start doubting their process. And if after a couple of games, things continue to not go the way that they want them to go, then they start trying to change things and adjust and all. And yes, there is an importance to being able to adapt your process, to evolve your process. But you don't want to necessarily just change everything just because it's not working. You still want to stick with your process and trust it. And yeah, there might be some fine-tuning here or there, or some tweaks here and there. But ultimately, you got to determine your process, and you got to trust that process, because if you start doubting the process in the middle of a cold streak, then you're kind of just like it's stuck in the middle of the water without a paddle to go anywhere. So I think, having that process and trusting that process, you at least will have that paddle in the boat with you, so you can get back to shore one way or another. It might not necessarily be easy, it might not be pretty, it might not be the way that you anticipated it going, but if you determine that process and you trust that process, and you stick with it, at some point you're going to start to see the results that you're striving for.
I think we're in complete agreement on most of that, if not all of it.
And I think it also speaks to the importance of separating winning from success, because you can have a great approach, you can stick to your process, but not get the result that you want. and I think it's really easy to be discouraged if you don't get that outcome that you want, but you still got to stick with it and trust that process for better or worse.
That's where, as a coach, it can be extremely frustrating when you feel like you've worked with an individual and you have a plan for success, and like a game or two goes by where they don't see success, then you see them the next day and you can see noticeable physical changes, and you just like bang your head against the wall like, that's not the answer. The answer is not to freaking change everything around every time you see an 0 for 4. It's never going to work. But there are some players out there that are like that, and that's where, as a coach, you want to just scream it at them.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously people want to do what they need to do to have success. But you're right, trusting it is very difficult to do at times. Do you think that you had talked before we started recording about routines a little bit? Do you think that routines play a big part in this? And if so, could you kind of define what it is to have a winning routine? Like, what does that mean? What does that mean for teams or individuals?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think routines are huge, especially in a sport like baseball. I mean, routines basically come down to a sequence of actions that help prepare us for a task. And so, yeah, you have your pre-game routines, but, there's also a pre-pitch routine, a pre-at-bat routine, a pre-inning routine, a post-inning routine, a post-game routine. There's lots of different kinds of routines, but really what it comes down to is consistent preparation leads to consistent performance. So, once again, every team, every athlete is going to have some different things about the routine that's going to be best for them, most effective for them individually. I think really that with routines, there's basically two schools of thought. Either treating every day like it's the championship game, or treating every game like it's just another game. And really, whatever school of thought is going to fit best for you. I think, if you're preparing for every game like it's the championship game, then when you get to the championship game, then it just kind of feels like just any other game. But I think for a lot of athletes, that's another one of those things that's easier said than done. I think, treating every game just another game is an interesting way to approach it. Last year, I heard an amazing quote from Nick Castellanos from the Cubs. He was talking to a reporter, and he said, every day is opening day. And the reporter's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, every day is opening day. Prove to me that it's not. And he's like, well, you have like your record and you have your stats. He's like, well, that's only true if you believe you're your record. If you believe your stats. And so he says to the reporter, if what has happened is a memory and what's going to happen is a thought, you're taking yourself out of right now. So in that case, every day is opening day. So, whether you want to prepare for every game like it's a championship game or prepare for every game like it's opening day, whatever, use what's best for you, but just be consistent with it. If you're preparing for every game like it's opening day, then you can't get to the championship game and be like, oh shit, now it's the championship game, I need to do something different. No, if you're going to prepare for every game like it's opening day, then when you get to the championship game, well, it's opening day once again. So at the end of the day, just what's most important about routines is that consistent preparation leads to consistent performance.
I like that. Do you think that are physical routines as important as anything else? Like in baseball, should you get into a habit where you're kind of trying to do the same thing before every game just to give yourself a level of comfort and consistency? Same thing like at bat to at bat. Should you try to do something similar like, when you're in the hole, when you're on deck? Like, do those things play a part into having individual success? Or even like, between pitches, I'm sure most people, at least our age or my age or older, thinking about like Nomar Garciaparra doing the thing with his batting gloves. Like, do routines like that help in any way to be consistent and have success?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things to understand, though, about routines is that just as it's important to physically warm up before a game, you want to mentally warm up before a game as well. So, there's things you want to do physically and things you want to do mentally to prepare for a game. I think another thing that's really important about routines to make them most effective is to keep them simple, flexible, and adaptable. You don't want very concrete, intricate, or really rigid routines, because the more complex and intricate and rigid they become, the more likely that something could disrupt it. I think the best routines are simple, flexible, and adaptable. Like, I think back to the 2008 World Series, where before Game 4, there was like a 2.5-hour rain delay. And so, you're stepping out on the mound before a World Series, if you have a really concrete routine of, like, I need to do exactly this at exactly this time for exactly this long, well, when that gets disrupted, it's like, oh crap, what do I do now? So I think making them simple and flexible and adaptable to the circumstances gives you the best possible chance to be effective. And in that same World Series, there was the 2-day rain delay in the middle of Game 5. And Ryan Madson was the 8th inning pitcher for the Phillies at that time. And everyone knew when the game resumed that Ryan Madson was going to be stepping on the mound for the Phillies in the top of the 7th inning. And so what he wanted to do, he wanted to prepare for it was like every other game. So, like, the reporters were asking him and all, like, how are you going to warm up? And he's like, well, I'm just going to treat it like it's any other game. And it's like he told Charlie Manuel, like, I want to be in the bullpen, and I want you to call the bullpen phone and tell me to get up and get loose, just like it was a normal game. So, it was a really bizarre circumstance, but he was flexible and adaptable with it and was still consistent with it.
I didn't know that. It's pretty cool. And I think that being flexible and adaptable is really important, particularly at lower levels, because you're not going to have the same opportunity every day. If, for example, you are a hitter and you really like this particular pregame routine, you might go to an opposing field as a high school player and they don't have a cage, so you can't hit.
Yeah.
Or you got to hit wiffle balls or take dry swings, or there were fields that I went to as a high school coach where, like, we would take our tees with us, and, like, I didn't know what they were going to have, so we were prepared to hit wiffle balls. We had tees in case we could do that. We could hit soft toss, or if we had a chance to hit on the field or in a cage, we could do that too. But it was like, we had to plan to be adaptable, because I didn't know what the heck we were going to have at these different fields. And if you were a person that, like, needed this really particular specific way to warm up, like, that probably wasn't going to happen very often, so you were going to set yourself up for failure.
Yeah, no, just you're spot on. And so I think rather than getting caught up on the specific activity that you're trying to do, trying to incorporate onto your routine, think about the concept and then give yourself a couple different strategies. So rather than being like, I have to hit in the cage for exactly 30 minutes before every game, take a step back and be like, okay, the concept is I want to take a couple swings, get a feel for the bat in my hand, get a feel for my swing being fluid and all. And so, okay, here's a couple of things that I can do. I can go and I can hit in the cage. I can just take some soft toss. Yeah, I can do whatever. And you give yourself a couple different strategies, so that way if you get to a field and there's not a cage, well, that doesn't have to disrupt your routine, because it's not about the specific activity, it's about the concept, and you give yourself a couple different strategies that can incorporate that concept.
Tell me if this is maybe a good one to have. This is kind of what I would tell hitters to do, but I just kind of told hitters, regardless of where we are or how many swings you get, I just want you to hit until you feel good about your swing. And, like, when you feel like, when you just have the certain feel, like, to me, hitting is a feel thing, particularly on game day. Like, we're not going to talk about mechanics or anything. I just want you to swing until you feel pretty good. And if you feel good, you hit a couple line drives in a row, like, get out of there and just, like, leave that cage with a good feeling, and then go back to the dugout and just let it happen when it comes to the game. Do you think is that an example of being flexible, where you're sort of thinking about, like, what's the purpose? What's the purpose of this, and what am I trying to get out of this? And you can be flexible and have different ways to get there, as long as you have that place where you're trying to get. Is that a decent way to go about it, do you think?
So I think it depends on how you look at it. I think the idea of just take some swings until you feel good, that's a great idea. But what if you're swinging for a half hour before the game and it just doesn't feel right? You something just feels off and you're not sure what it is. And I think that can end up being really frustrating. So I think even with that, being flexible and adaptable with that, and to a certain extent of just being okay, it is what it is. Kerry Wood was recently talking about that 20 strikeout game he had his rookie year, and what was so crazy is that he talked about his warm-up. He's like, I had a terrible warm-up. I couldn't throw a strike. All my breaking balls were off. I just had a terrible bull session before the game. And at some point, he was just like, you know what, screw it. I got what I got. I'm just going to go out there and perform. So I think, you just want to get a good feel, but it's not I need to keep swinging until I get the right feel, because you can be swinging for an hour and tire yourself out. And, yeah, you might feel great at the end of your warm-up, but then you're freaking exhausted by the time the game starts. So I love the concept, but even with that, still being flexible and adaptable within that.
The last thing I want to touch on, Donato, before I let you go, the mental side of winning is real. I think maybe teams don't spend as much time on it as they should, but I think that every team at every level, every individual at every level agrees that the mental side of it is pretty important. How do you recommend that teams and individuals go about practicing what they need to practice mentally, to be consistent winners, to be successful on a consistent basis? Do you have any suggestions or thoughts just about training mental skills? When do you do it? What should be some things that you're really working on? And any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so honestly, there's not really a simple answer to that of just do this to mentally prepare. I think you got to think of the mental training just like you would the physical training. Let me take a step back here. There's four areas that you can train in sport. You can train physically, technically, tactically, and mentally. So physical, getting bigger, stronger, faster, more flexible, more agile. Technical, your fundamentals, your mechanics, your approach. Tactical, so training your strategy and stuff like that. And then mental, so working on your mental skills, things like confidence, focus, motivation, composure, goal setting, routine, self-talk. I think what I would encourage teams to do is to hire a mental skills consultant or a mental skills coach and have them work with your team and work with your players. And that's not to say that coaches aren't capable of doing these things, but most coaches don't have the proper training and expertise in the mental side of it in order to really be able to effectively teach others. I think just making mental training part of your team culture is so important, because with more mental training, you're going to become more mentally tough. And if you're mentally tough, then you'll be able to get out of slumps and cold streaks faster, and you'll be able to ride the hot streaks even longer. So I think rather than looking at the mental side of it as just something you do once in a while, it should just, the mental side of it should be part of everything that you do, because I think that's one thing that's most interesting about the mental training is that the mental training is incorporated into the physical, technical, and tactical training as well. So if you're working on the mental game, you're also improving physically, technically, and tactically as well.
No question that the mental part of it is a big part of winning, and I think the best teams out there do a really good job at physically preparing guys. They also do a really good job of mentally preparing their guys. This will be the last thing before I let you go. Do you think that to prepare your team mentally, your practices need to be very difficult and present a lot of failure, as opposed to the feel-good practice Do you think that practices should be difficult and should put your players in a situation where the practice is almost more difficult than a game? That way when the game comes around, it feels like, I've been here a million times before. Is that something that you think is important to building mental toughness, is having difficult, challenging practice atmospheres?
My knee-jerk reaction is to say yes, but I think it really depends on where your team is at. I think maybe like if your team is really struggling and you're going through a cold streak, then maybe that's one of those times to do like one of those feel-good practices and maybe lighten the load a little bit and do something that can build players' confidence. But I think it is important to really challenge yourself in practice and put yourself in adversity situations. I think it is important for pitchers to put them to practice being in a position where the bases are loaded with one out and you have a 3-0 count, and practice working through that. So that way, if you step out on the mound in the middle of the game and you're in a situation where the bases are loaded and there's one out and you're facing a 3-0 count, you've already worked through that in practice. You've already worked through that in your mind. So that way, you don't lose your composure because you've already seen it before. You've already been there before in practice and in training and in preparation. So, I think to answer your question, it just really depends on where your team is at. And I think the best coaches have a really good feel of what kind of practice is appropriate for certain situations. I think really good coaches know when it's time to have that feel-good practice and when it's time to have that really challenging and demanding practice.
I love it. Donato, this has been great. This is Donato Finelli, everybody. He is a mental training and peak performance specialist with Capex Consulting. You can find Donato if you want to reach out to him and talk about either individual or team things that he, training he can do with your teams. Donato, how would somebody get a hold of you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at Donato_Finelli. And you can also send me an email at donato@capexconsulting.com.
Very good. This has been great today. I appreciate all your time very much and all the insight into winning, the mental side of winning. Donato, this has been great. I appreciate all your time today, and thanks for your contributions to the website. If you haven't checked out Donato's videos on the website, I would suggest you do so. They cover different things than we talked about today, really good things for individuals and teams on the website. But Donato, thanks one more time, and your time is very valuable, and we appreciate it so much.
My pleasure. I appreciate it.